Hello! Last year, the Women's Prize created a new award honoring nonfiction written by women, and the inaugural winner of that award was the very powerful book Doppelganger by Naomi Klein, a book that really personally resonated with me and that I still continue to think about. And just today, they have announced their long list of 16 books for this year's nonfiction award, and the prize has very kindly sent me all of these books. I'm not going to attempt to lift all of them up because they're quite heavy, but these are some of them. But I want to go through and show you each of these books individually and give you brief summaries of them, and if I have any thoughts or more information about them. And then we can get into discussing what we want to read first, because there's a great diversity here and they all sound really fascinating. These are books of biography and memoir and history on a whole range of subjects, from art to activism, crime, politics, the environment, medicine, national histories, royalty, law, war, basically the whole range of human experience. And so I can't wait to start diving into some of these books. So the shortlist is going to be announced on March 26th, and then the winner is going to be announced on June 12th, alongside the fiction winner for this year's prize. So the very first book I want to discuss is a memoir called Ootlin by Jenni Fagan. And Jenni Fagan is a Scottish author, and from when she was born, she was taken into the care system, and throughout her childhood, she lived in many different houses and was given a number of different names, so had a very tumultuous childhood, and she discusses this in a very frank way in this book, but also looks at the care system in the UK as a whole, so it sounds very powerful. And I've read some of Jenni Fagan's novels before. Her novel Luckenbooth was very creative, and her novel The Sunlight Pilgrims I thought was so emotional and beautiful, so I'm really looking forward to diving into this. Wildthing, A Life of Paul Gauguin by Sue Prideaux. So this is looking at the history of the great post-impressionist painter, who's probably best known for his scenes of French Polynesia. So it's examining his art, but also the history of his life, how he used to work as a stockbroker and then a salesman and a canal digger, but also a journalist looking at colonialism. And I've always been really fascinated by this artist's life and wanted to know more about it. So this is a perfect opportunity to discover more about him, because I remember back when in my early 20s, actually my late teens, I was living in Boston, and I would often go to the Museum of Fine Arts, which was very close to where I lived. And there's this fantastic large-scale painting by Paul Gauguin called Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? And I would just sit in front of this painting for ages meditating on it. So I'm really excited to discover more about his actual life. Autocracy Inc, The Dictators Who Want to Run the World by Anne Applebaum. And this is examining how autocratic systems function in the 21st century. So rather than there being like one big bad individual who's trying to run the world, how there are networks in politics that use financial structures and propaganda and surveillance to control the population, to try to shore up power and wealth for themselves and to make themselves a function like outside the realms of law, and who aren't accountable. And so this is a really pressing subject matter, I think, for the world today. So it sounds like a very urgent and important book. 1,000 Threads by Neneh, the great singer, songwriter, and rapper who became very popular in the 80s. And this memoir explores her life growing up in Sweden and in a very artistic family and the many different influences which have formed her artistic sensibility. I went to see Neneh Cherry perform about 15 years ago, I think, in North London, and it was such a great show, and I've heard such great things about this book. My own neighbor was recommending it to me the other day, and she's not especially a Neneh Cherry fan, but she found this book so fascinating, so I'm really looking forward to it. Embers of the Hands, Hidden Histories of the Viking Age by Eleanor Barraclough. So when I think of Vikings, very stereotypically, I just imagine warriors who pillage, but this author explores the culture and past of the Viking people, of ordinary individuals and their lives through their storytelling and oral tradition, but also through artifacts that were left behind. So I think this will be a really enlightening look at people who lived for centuries across Scandinavia, but also explored the entire world. By the fire we carry, the generations-long fight for justice on native land by Rebecca Nagle, who's a member of the Cherokee Nation. And this is looking at the history and struggle for native land and sovereignty in eastern Oklahoma of the Cherokee people, of instances of oppression and injustice, but also moments of resistance and uprising, and how the struggle carries on today. So this is recommended by the author Noreen Massoud, who was longlisted for the Nonfiction Award last year, and she calls it breathtaking and a triumph. The Story of a Hart by Rachel Clarke, who is a doctor, and this recounts the tale of a 9-year-old girl who was in a fatal accident, but her heart was continuing to function. So her family, in her grief, made the difficult decision to donate her heart, and it was received by a 9-year-old boy who was in need of a heart transplant. And so Rachel Clarke explores the technology and medicine that allows heart transplants to take place, but also this very emotional story. And so this sounds like a very heart-rending but beautiful and inspiring book. Tracker by Alexis Wright, who's an Aboriginal Australian author, and she was approached by a man named Tracker Tilmouth, who's an Aboriginal political activist, and he wanted to tell her his story. So they connected, they went on a journey across Australia, exchanging stories about Aboriginal culture and history and people that they know in common in the fight for justice, and she compiled all of that into this book. And Alexis Wright is an incredibly well-regarded author. She's won many different awards. Most recently, she published a giant, complex novel called Praiseworthy. This is a photo of her, and this is published by the excellent independent publisher And Other Stories, who for the past year have been publishing their books in this format. Sister-in-Law, Fighting for Justice in a System Designed by Men by Harriet Wistrich, who is a solicitor that has been involved in a number of high-profile cases where groups of women were struggling to find justice. So a group of women that appealed to a parole board who wanted to release a serial rapist early from prison, and women that were involved in a case of the spy cops who infiltrated activist groups and formed romantic relationships with young women in those groups. This very famous case that partly inspired Rachel Kushner's recent novel Creation Lake. So she examines how sexism and misogyny are baked into the laws and politics of the systems that govern us, and how we can fight against that. Agent Zoe, the untold story of fearless World War II resistance fighter Elizabeta Zawadzka by Clare Mulley. This is a biography of an incredible individual, Lisbetta, more popularly known as Agent Zoe, because she was a Polish freedom fighter and special agent who fought against the Gestapo. But after World War II, she became a prisoner of the Soviet communist regime. So it tells the story of her life. And there are some photos here that I want to show. So here's Lisbetta. She lived to quite an old age, but you can also see photos of her when she was arrested. And the story of her life was actively suppressed by the Soviet regime. So this is finally bringing her and her life into the light. What the Wild Sea Can Be, The Future of the World's Ocean by Helen Scales. So we all know that the world's oceans are under threat, but this is looking at how technologies and activism and an understanding of the history of our oceans can help us to both clean and preserve them. And so it's grappling with the realities of this, but it's also taking quite an optimistic view. And I love how vibrant and colorful this cover is. I also love this map on the inside cover of the world that really focuses on the sea life and the sea plants around the world. The Eagle and the Hart, the tragedy of Richard II and Henry IV by Helen Castor, who's a historian of the medieval and Tudor English periods. And this is the story of Richard of Bordeaux and Henry of Bolingbroke, who were royal cousins in the 1300s. And at 10 years of age, Richard became King Richard II. And as he went on to rule, he was very tyrannical in the way that he ruled and inspired a lot of fear in his subjects. But Henry was very brave and inspired people to follow him because of his courage. So they had very different systems for ruling, and this obviously led to a giant rivalry for the crown and for power, and pitted these cousins against each other. So this tells this very dramatic story that tore the country apart during this period. So it sounds very dramatic and really scandalous. Raising Hare by Chloe Dalton. And this is a memoir where the author explores a period during the pandemic where she moved to the countryside, and there she found a baby hare which she took into her care because it was injured and alone, and she raised it to become an adult hare. So it's about the story of connecting with nature in this way, but also a period of transformation. And that makes it sound like quite a saccharine tale, but I think it's meant to be very inspiring and really profound in her observations about nature and personal development. It has a beautiful inside cover, and I'm a huge fan of the book H is for Hawk, and this has been compared to that. Why Fish Don't Exist, A Story of Loss, Love, and the Hidden Order of Life by Lulu Miller. And I find it really difficult to summarize or understand entirely what this book is about, because I think it's partly a memoir about how the author became very interested in a 19th century taxonomist who's responsible for labeling a lot of the species of fish in our world. So it's looking at how you can create order in worlds that's seemingly run by chaos. And I think this came out a couple of years ago in the States, but it was more recently published here in the UK. And every review I've seen of this book raves about it and says how unique and inspiring it is. So I'm really intrigued to dive into it and see what it's actually like. It has some really creepy illustrations as well. The Peepshow, The Murders at 10 Rillington Place by Kate Summerscale. This is looking at a scandalous and terrifying case that occurred in 1953 in London, in Notting Hill, at a particular property where the bodies of many different women were discovered buried there. And a former cop resided at this property and was found to be involved in these killings. And so it investigates the story behind this, how a man was already found and convicted and hanged for the murders of 2 murders that had occurred at this property previously, and how this might have been an injustice. And so looking at the complexity of this case and how it became a great scandal of the time. And on the inside cover, there's a photo of this location and all of the people that gathered to gawk at it. And finally, there is Private Revolutions, Coming of Age in a New China by Yuan. And this is looking at the lives of 4 different women in China in the 1980s and 1990s, and how they kind of defied the system and beat the odds to gain an education and become workers and activists in a rapidly changing culture, and showing how the individual can carve out a path for themselves in a much larger and oppressive system. So this sounds really fascinating and inspiring. So those are the 16 books on the long list. I would love to know if you've read any of these books and what you think about them, or if you're interested in reading any of them now. There are so many of these I want to read, but I'll probably start with these 3 because they're ones that I've been wanting to get to. But I'm looking forward to discussing these books with you over the course of the next few months, and it'll be really exciting to see what the shortlist is on March 26th. But I hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I will speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.